The finest hours of the Second World War. The Battle of Britain. (1940) June. Hitler still thinks that subduing England is a high-risk challenge. On the other hand, he trusts Spain and Italy will help him take over Gibraltar. On the 19th, after the Spanish Army Chief of the General Staff, General Vigón, has visited Hitler, Franco agrees to get into the war in return for taking over Oran, Morocco, and the French African colonies. Hitler reckons that the Spanish army will not add a great deal to his European struggle and sends Admiral Canaris to Spain to gather information in order for the Wehrmacht General Staff to arrange the plans for an invasion of Gibraltar. However, through the press, he declares his will to reach a peace agreement with England. There is no sense in continuing to fight, he says.
Things happening.
But Churchill's will and democratic spirit are bent to war. Europe cannot be in the hands of a tyrant. Our freedom and the freedom of the people under Nazi terror must be preserved until the last drop of blood, he says in Parliament.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender.
As an answer to his words, on the 30th, the German troops seized the Channel Islands. The same day, Alfred Jodl, the Wehrmacht Chief of Staff, tells Hitler that from his point of view, landing on English soil must be regarded as a last-minute expedient. It is to be launched only if Great Britain has been militarily and economically deeply weakened. The British by no means feel beaten. On the contrary, the most essential weapons to preserve the island, the Royal Navy and the Air Force, are ready to fight. The RAF pilots and the Hurricane and Spitfire fighters have already proven their ability in warfare. Churchill has moved the manufacturing of planes from the Air Department to a new department under the civilian Lord Beaverbrook, who will exclusively be in charge of making planes. In spite of the Army's annoyance at this appointment, Beaverbrook was considered at the end of the war as a national hero. He succeeded in raising the monthly production of fighters from 140 to 500 units. He sets the priority on making Spitfires. This type had proven to be more maneuverable than the German Messerschmitt 109, thus allowing the pilots to dodge the enemy in a difficult moment. July. On July the 2nd, and on the basis of Göring's theory, the Führer tells his generals that control of the airspace and persistent bombings of military facilities will lead to a victory over England. Therefore, preliminary plans to achieve these objectives must be set in motion. In a few weeks, all private boats in the occupied territory are seized. Their hulls are strengthened and they are supplied with navigation devices. At the same time, the landing troops are carefully chosen, which will carry out future landing maneuvers in English territory. On the 4th, German Stuka sink several freight ships sailing for Portland, finding no resistance from the RAF planes. These had received orders to withdraw from the channel and move along with their airfields to northern England. The German field marshal regards it as a token of weakness and orders the Luftwaffe to attack English land. On the 10th, Colonel Fink and his Group No. 2 planes take off from Arras, aiming to make a raid on British land. The Luftwaffe assault force is made of 120 bombers and 50 fighters. There is no radio communication between the flying squads, and that's why most of them will not know that General Kesselring has canceled the operation. Fink and his group have started on their own what Churchill refers to as the Battle of England. They raid the freight ships off the Channel coasts, the shipyards, the southern towns, and East Church Airport. For Churchill, the invasion is unavoidable. On the 14th, in the French National Day of Celebration, he reminisces with General de Gaulle over his last visit to the beautiful Champs-Élysées in Paris. Now, circumstances have driven him to decree the compulsory enlisting to ask the British to get ready for the worst. The French general encourages his people to fight for their country, contending that a battle has been lost, but we have not lost the war. France is not a defeated country. This strained situation is raising controversies in the British government. The Prime Minister blames Nazi tyranny for the European hardships, but a group of aristocrats, including the Duke of Windsor, is secretly trying to reach an agreement with the Germans to end the war. It's a vain attempt. On the 16th, Hitler forwards his generals Guideline Number 16, including all the details about Operation Sea Lion. Meanwhile, Field Marshal Göring declares to the High Command that the deadline for the Great Invasion is August the 5th, if the weather is appropriate. He boasts the Luftwaffe will seal England's destiny in 2 weeks, at most. From Berlin, the Führer repeats his peace offerings, warning Churchill that should he refuse, England will be destroyed. I speak as victor, not as vanquished. Mr. Churchill must avoid the sacrifice of millions. But once again, the British Prime Minister refuses the Nazi proposal. We are determined to fight to the end, if need be, for years. If necessary, alone.
And make up your mind what ought to be done.
Through Kennedy, the American ambassador in London, Churchill has won Roosevelt's trust. Now he believes in British victory. Although the president's military advisors tell him to stop supplying weapons to England, Roosevelt is conscious of Britain's isolation. He admires Churchill's boldness for having decided to sink a part of the French fleet in Mer el-Kabir on July the 3rd. This trust between both leaders, fostered by Ambassador Kennedy, rises to friendship, and so, on the 19th, in his candidate speech for a third term, Roosevelt gives an answer to the Nazi leader. We are enemies of the Axis dictatorships, and they are only stopped by resistance, not with agreements leading to surrender. These words end all disloyal attitudes in the British government. Everyone devising how to make terms with Hitler changed their mind. After what happened in Dunkirk, the British people hope more than ever for victory and widely support Churchill's endeavors to sign a war coalition with the United States. Yet, Hitler regards Roosevelt's warning as a token of his intentions to make war. On the 31st, in a meeting with his general staff, he declares, "The British are back to their challenging attitude. Something's the matter in London." Since May, the German Secret Service have known about the British mobile radar because they had seized one in the beaches of northern France. However, the German command did not take it as something important because they felt sure that their own radio measuring techniques were well ahead of the British. This Nazi disparagement of the British communication systems was to be written down in history as one of the greatest blunders of the war. The German pilots never knew why the sky over them was full of Spitfires when they were reaching the coasts of England. The Secret Service warns Churchill about the movements of the German Air Force. More than 1,500 bombers and 1,000 fighters are being moved to airfields located in the northern area of occupied Europe. There, Goering's forces are ready and planning their onslaught of England. The British leader watches the German movements closely, knowing well the Luftwaffe's capacity to destroy. He has seen it razing to the ground all of Western Europe. He sets absolute priority to making of new crafts and orders the enlistment in the army of thousands of Polish, Czech, anti-Nazi Germans, French, Dutch, Norwegian, and Belgian refugees eager to fight. The British first line of defense is made of the Spitfires and Hurricanes gathered in the fighter command under Air Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, a veteran of World War I. He would rather send his planes to preserve England than to protect the ships sailing to Channel, having thus strong arguments with Churchill upon the issue. Apart from the British pilots, he can count on Polish, Czech, and American pilots, well trained in combat and enlisted in the RAF to fight against the Nazis. The most effective weapon is the early alert system, a string of 20 radar stations all along the coast. They are located in towers 400 feet high and supported by a group of land observers. These stations are in reciprocal contact and moreover are connected to the Air Command headquarters. This allows spotting the invading planes and makes it easier for the British fighters to quickly swap sectors in their search for the enemy's main body of planes. The Dowding plan is to combine the sensible use of planes and pilots to the effectiveness of the radar stations posted in the southern British coast. They are able to spot thousands of movements even when the enemies are operating above the continent. At the end of July, discord and distension are still evident in the German High Command. Admiral Schneuwind, Chief of the Navy's General Staff, defies General Halder, Chief of the Army's General Staff, telling Hitler his lack of confidence in Operation Sea Lion. He thinks it's a makeshift and poorly thought plan in its current draft because a hard response from the Royal Navy would make all landings impossible on the forecasted dates. August. On August the 1st, as an answer to the dissensions among the Army officers, Hitler issues his guideline number 17, in which he launches the air warfare against the British with the plan codenamed Aldertag, or Day of the Eagle. For Operation Sea Lion, he instructs the High Command to be ready for September the 15th. The landings will take place as forwarded by the Navy on narrow tracts of coast to be slowly widened as demanded by the Army. Occupation will be widespread between the 19th and the 26th of the month. Göring trusts that after 2 months of training, the Luftwaffe will only need 4 days to do away with the British planes and destroy their radar system. The striking force of the 3 Luftflotten is ready for the attack. 1,000 bombers of the Do-17, HE-111, and Ju-88 series, 320 Ju-87 Stukas, 700 Me-109 fighters, and 250 Me-110 fighters. With more than 2,000 aircraft, Göring feels certain enough to tell Hitler that Aldertag will be the ultimate proof in history of the airborne weapons' supremacy. On the 12th, the Luftwaffe shifts to another strategic step, as devised by the High Command. The Isle of Wight radar station is destroyed, and all the British coast stations are raided. But Marshal Dowding has arranged for some quick maintenance units, and the stations are back to work in practically no time. Waiting for good weather, and after several delays, in the early morning of the 13th, the Luftwaffe is ready to start the Day of the Eagle. Bad weather conditions make Göring delay the starting order to the afternoon. But when this order reaches the airfields of Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, more than 1,000 planes had already taken off and were flying over the channel, aiming at their objectives. The German planes are stopped by several RAF fighter groups who dive on them in furious clashes. Many of them are shot down. But the weather and the British fighters can't help most of the Luftwaffe planes from dropping their explosives on the island's southern airfields and shipyards. In the evening, the weather conditions are still far from good, and the so carefully prepared Day of the Eagle draws to its end after just some raids over English land. This first day, the Germans have lost 45 planes, with 13 for the British. But the German Air Force has destroyed 5 English airfields. Both sides' strategy has been perfectly well outlined. The Luftwaffe sends big bomber squads escorted by fighters. The RAF tries to stop them, relying on its pilots' ability and specifically on the handling qualities of the Spitfires. On the 14th, the big offensive second day, it is cloudy. The attacking German planes are no more than 500. Their mission is to destroy strategic objectives and turn back to base as soon as possible. The RAF pilots keep proving their skill and shoot down 75 German planes for 34 losses. The British are well taking advantage of the chances for refueling in their own airfields, as well as getting all information dispatched by the radars checking the German closing maneuvers. The Germans come from distant northern European bases with just enough fuel to attack and turn back. Their short range is a crucial issue. Many of them fall on English land or in the sea. The splendid weather in the early morning of the 15th makes the Germans regard it as the critical Day of the Eagle. Göring orders the Luftflotte No. 5, posted in Norway and Denmark, to join in the assault. A total amount of 900 fighters and 1,300 bombers rush onto Great Britain from the north and from the south. The day and night operations, carried out by ME-110, HE-111, and Ju-88 over the harbors and the British plane manufacturing industries, meet with the effective defenses of the radar station Strings and the British fighters, launching swift attacks against the Germans. One more time, the Nazi plane's short range is the reason for another failure in most operations. Göring knows that the Luftwaffe is not able to strike at long distance, but hopes that more than 2,000 raids carried all along the day will have wounded to death the British Air Force. His pilots tell him that the English fighters could hardly resist the assault waves. But the truth is that in spite of the Luftwaffe's great effort, the fighter command's planes have known how to take advantage of the Nazi escort's sluggishness. Escort planes fly next to the bombers at low speed, making for excellent conditions for the English attacks. The final toll on the 15th is 70 German planes down for 44 for the British. In addition to that, the Kent and Sussex airports have been destroyed, with 20 Hurricanes that could not take off. Göring decides to change his strategy. He increases the amount of escort fighters in order to make some of them carry assault assignments while the others protect the bombers. The secretary for the plane manufacturers, Lord Beaverbrook, had obtained a remarkable increase in the manufacturing of planes, making more units than there were pilots in combat training. But even if the British shoot down more German planes than what they lose, they are conscious of being outnumbered, so the loss of a plane or the death of a pilot is an important setback for their defense plans. On the 16th, Churchill's secret services finally break the Luftwaffe's Enigma secret code. This gives the English the chance to know with more accuracy the German planes' objectives, giving them at the same time a larger scope for defense action. Göring knows that the German strikes are improving their effectiveness and considers not giving the RAF any respite in order to destroy it. 1,500 planes are sent daily to raid English land. The German command tries new tactics, swapping plane series in their squads. The Stukas have been withdrawn, being quite defenseless in front of the British fighters. Likewise, the Messerschmitt's 110 have proven to be useless as escort planes. On the 18th, the Nazis strike the Biggin Hill airfield with the new Do-17 aircraft flying at low level. The British defenders and pilots cannot withstand these assaults, on the other hand, virtually involving suicide for many German pilots. Although the fighter command and the British government are satisfied with the RAF, they are conscious of its narrow resistance capacity. Marshal Dowding devises a pilot shift schedule, something the Germans did not. The veterans in combat are sent to the northern airfields to take a rest. In spite of being within range of the German bases in Norway and Denmark, these airfields are much more undisturbed. They are now the most effective weapon of the British defense, drawing all assistance. At the beginning of August, there were 1,400, but 3 weeks later, they had come down to 1,000. What the English really fear is the time when they will lack pilots to fly new planes. Furthermore, the communication systems and the airfields have been smashed. England is at the breaking point of its possibilities. Goering knows this, and despite his plane's heavy losses, the raids upon British land are persistent. "200 German planes keep on destroying the English airfields and fuel reservoirs in the southeast. Unpredictably, due to a routing mistake, 12 bombers raid London on the 23rd, killing 9 civilians. As a response, and on Churchill's orders, on the 25th, 80 RAF bombers strike the weapons factories north of Berlin and the downtown city itself. Under a huge anti-aircraft fire, the British planes have dropped their bombs and millions of leaflets saying, "Hitler has begun a war that will not end until he dies." There were no civilian victims, but the Russian Foreign Affairs Secretary, Molotov, who was dealing with von Ribbentrop on remnants from the British Empire, declared, "What I see falling on Berlin doesn't drive me to think that the English are finished." On the 26th, the Germans desperately send their planes against England, but they are stopped particularly by the Bristol Beaufighters, carrying radar on board. Because of that, a great number of Nazi planes are shot down. On August the 28th, the British bombers one more time strike Berlin, killing 10 civilians. The fact has, upon Hitler, a disproportionate effect in regard to the actual damage. Along with the Air Force Chief Marshal, he had promised Berlin would never be reached by bombs. Exasperated, he faces Goring and blames him for the Luftwaffe still not having destroyed the RAF. He calls for an immediate meeting of the General Staff. After concluding that the English planes would be easier to shoot if they were gathered for protecting London, he orders the Blitz offenses to aim at London. The Luftwaffe, following Hitler's guidelines, stops chasing the RAF and focuses on punishing London. The Nazi leader thinks that a persistent bombing of the city will raise panic through the citizens, compelling their government to surrender. On the 7th, 300 bombers escorted by 600 fighters rush on to London. This rain of bombs yields 448 killed and huge damages. For 2 more days, the Germans dropped their bombs on the capital, finding no resistance. The reason is the RAF is making use of this change of targets to reorganize and reset the airfield's capability. Then, the British fighters show up in great squads, attacking the German bombers. This time, they run into the Focke-Wulf 190, the new Luftwaffe fighter. It has a great speed and ascendant capacity, forcing them to fight at their ceiling. At the same time, RAF planes flying in the opposite direction ruthlessly strike military objectives in Berlin, Dusseldorf, Essen, and other German cities. The Führer is in a blatant rage when addressing a speech in Berlin. He threatens with devastating retaliations. If they raid our cities, we will wipe theirs off the map. After several weeks of fighting, the Battle of England is turning the Führer's first excitement into anger and weariness. Due to the Luftwaffe heavy losses, Göring orders to perform only night raids. The British anti-aircraft artillery is not powerful, but the new Defiant and Blenheim fighters, along with the rest of the RAF planes, are making a failure out of the German plan to take over English airspace. Doubts about the invasion of England spread among German officers. Admiral Reiter asks the Führer what date he's thinking of for crossing the Channel. Hitler answers, "I'm afraid there is too great of a risk." However, the government and all the English are on the warpath. They believe the German invasion to be impending and that they'll soon see a rain of paratroopers on their land. On the 8th, the German planes are again raiding the power stations, the railroads, and the roads surrounding London. This time with inflammatory bombs. "88 are shot down, but the British lose 21 crafts. The second wave consists of 400 planes set against 200 English fighters. The Luftwaffe planes bomb Liverpool, Swansea, and Bristol, far away from London, but they have to retreat before the onset of RAF fighters shoot down 28 German planes. Nevertheless, the Nazis have destroyed a good deal of the cities and killed more than 1,000 people. Göring announces on the radio, "This is a historic moment. Our Air Force has destroyed the enemy's heart." It is obvious that due to the scope of the raids, the English people live in terror. But it's also obvious that the first German condition for an invasion has not been achieved. The British Air Force is not defeated. On the 10th, Churchill orders British bombers to drop its explosives at random over the German cities. The raid is so intense that even Joseph Goebbels gets a non-exploded bomb in his Berlin house garden. Hitler finds inexplainable the fact that German air supremacy is failing to totally eradicate the RAF in the given time. He blames Göring's lack of foresight and makes him responsible for not having correctly assessed the British counterattacking capabilities. Under these critical remarks from the Führer and from the OKW officers, Göring marks Sunday the 15th for his final attack. The weather conditions are excellent for flying. In the early morning, the British radar system picks up signals of German planes gathering in squads over the French coast. At noon, the Germans launch a great attack against London. 250 Spitfires and Hurricanes take off to the airspace, looking for German planes along the horizon. The massive attack of 250 bombers and 800 Luftwaffe fighters spread over the cities of London, Southampton, Liverpool, Manchester, and Bristol. The British planes attack the enemy squads in furious clashes, out of which many planes on both sides are shot down. This great offensive that, according to Göring, should decisively weaken the RAF, was however a heavy blow for the German pilots. The Luftwaffe lost 56 planes and 23 to the British. Once again, the Germans have been beaten by the RAF pilots.
All these countries,
Churchill announces in Parliament,
many of them,
Mr. Hitler is quickly losing the most essential part of his army.
it may well be that the final...
On September the 17th, the Führer says to his general staff, "Conquering France has meant 30,000 men for us. To cross the English Channel without any assurance as to success could mean many more. Now it's time for the Bolsheviks. Operation Sea Lion is canceled." In October, Hitler and Mussolini meet at the Brenner Pass. For the Nazi leader, the big problem in Southern Europe is the Royal Navy's hegemony in the Mediterranean and the inability of the Italian fleet to wrest control of the sea that the Duce likes to call the Italian Lake from the British. In these circumstances, the Führer issues Directive Number 18. It is essential to take Gibraltar and utilize the Canary Islands, Madeira, and Morocco to expel the British for good from the Mediterranean. If this is achieved, the Axis forces could go on the offensive against the Allied positions in Egypt and take Suez, the door to the Middle East. Churchill, meanwhile, decides to force the Italians out of Africa and communicates his intentions to General Archibald Wavell, Army Chief in the Middle East and North Africa. Together with General Richard O'Connor, in charge of the desert regiments, Wavell plans a strategy aimed at ending the Italian presence from Sidi Barrani in Egypt to Tunis. For the first time in the Second World War, the Allies take the initiative. Under these circumstances, Hitler meets Franco in Hendaia on October the 23rd. He asks the Spanish dictator to help him seize Gibraltar and to oversee the Mediterranean. Franco insists on his ambitions concerning North Africa. More than that, he asks the German leader for military and economical assistance for Spain, devastated after the Civil War. After long rows of speeches on the part of both leaders and their secretaries, von Ribbentrop, Espinosa, and Serrano, the agreement between Hitler and Franco stays as follows. Hendaia, October the 23rd, 1940. The Italian, German, and Spanish governments agree on the following issues. Number 1. The talks between the Führer and the Spanish chief of the state and those with the Duce have made clear the position of the three countries concerning the war and general politics. Number 2. Spain declares to be ready to join the threefold agreement with Italy, Germany, and Japan. Number 3. Spain declares its approval of the friendship treaty between Germany and Italy and of the secret protocol of May 22, 1939. Number 4. In order to fulfill its duties as an Allied power, Spain will join the current war against England on the side of the Axis once it has received military help, economic help, and raw materials backed by Germany. Number 5. In addition to Gibraltar, Spain will receive African territories to be settled after England's defeat. Number 6. The current protocol is strictly secret. Written in Italian, Spanish, and German. Hitler is satisfied after the Hendaia meeting. The secret agreement with Franco adds a new member to the Axis, and he is eager to go to war. The Spanish dictator has no alternative but to submit to the Nazi leader's will. But time is on his side. We've got to be patient. Today we are the anvil, but tomorrow we shall be the hammer, he says to Serrano in the return train. The Germans kept on raiding London, but at a slower pace. On November the 14th, Coventry was razed to the ground. On the 9th of December, Operation Compass begins. The 4th Indian Infantry Division and the 7th British Armored Division launch attacks against the Italian positions in Sollum and Sidi Barrami in Egypt, capturing 45,000 enemy soldiers. On the 29th, 8 historical churches of Rennes were brought down to debris. By then, the Luftwaffe planes had destroyed 3,500,000 British homes and killed more than 35,000 people. By the end of May 1941, German planes vanished from the English sky as quickly as they had come. Hitler has given up against the British bulwark. The Luftwaffe lost more than 2,300 planes. The RAF, only 500.
And the Nazi police have broken. They are sprung up from the...
The courage and skill of the RAF pilots is displayed in Winston Churchill's words.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
In the field of human conflicts, never so much was owed to so few.